What we're going to go over today is the proposed budget process. And throughout the meeting, I'm going to keep all the lines muted just to cut down on office noise and everything. And for those of you who joined recently, you should see a flashing icon in your meeting software. If you click on that, it's going to bring up the chat room. And at any point in time, you can stop me and send me a question during the presentation. Okay, so what we're going to be going over today is the proposed budget process. So I'm going to show you what the interface looks like. We're going to go over creating and importing warrant articles, and then all the warrant article details, so the proposed appropriations and revenues. We'll talk about default budgets, which are something that SB2 communities have. We'll talk about the pre-review process, how to enter your prior year information, the supplemental schedules, which again, that is SB2 communities, and it sounds like some people cannot hear me. It's going to send out a quick chat message. And then finally, after the supplemental schedules, we'll talk about submitting and finalizing the proposed budget. And if anybody here is from a city, I know that you guys have resolutions and not warrant articles. They pretty much function the same way in the portal. It's just a terminology change. So just a little bit about the tax rate setting process itself, in case anyone is totally new this year. The process starts off at the beginning of the year with drafting your warrant articles. And it's those warrant articles that become your proposed budget. So that's your 636 or your 737, or the 26 or 27 for schools. Out of that proposed budget, you're going to get your proposed appropriations and your estimated revenues. Those appropriations go to annual meeting, they get voted on, and they become your voted appropriations or your approved appropriations. Later on in the year, you're going to have the opportunity to go in and revise your estimated revenues once you have a better idea of the money coming in. And it's those appropriations and those revenues that feed into the tax rate setting process along with the valuation report. That's the MS1, which comes from the assessment web portal. So totally different website, but the data from that comes into the tax rate setting portal so that the DRA can calculate your tax rate. And then finally, after the fiscal period closes, whether you are fiscal year or calendar year, you're going to be reporting your actual expenditures and your actual revenues and things like that on the 535. So what we're going to be talking about today is just the proposed budget process. So creating, drafting the warrant articles, and finalizing the proposed budget. So it's relatively quick. There's a lot of interfaces and things like that, but I'll walk you through all of it. So to get to the budget interface, you're going to log into the portal and either click the budget tab or continue next to budget home. That's going to take you to the same location, and that's this budget interface. Now, we know that we're in proposed budget mode because we have that red bar at the top that says warrant drafting. And if we had any articles, they would appear here in the table. So right now I don't have any warrant articles, I just have an empty table. Right below it, I have 3 buttons. First, I can create my warrant articles from scratch. I can import my prior year articles, or I can start on my default budget. So again, default budgets are for SB2 communities. Not everybody's going to have them. So if we wanted to create warrant articles from scratch, we would click that button and be brought to the creation interface. Now, this is broken up into a couple different steps. You start by selecting a warrant article category. And then once you've chosen that, you're going to be able to select a type from the dropdown. Now, the category and type are what determine whether or not it's a monetary article, and they give you access to some template language. So once we pick the type, we'll see that we have some additional steps that appear. In step 2, I'm going to provide my warrant article number and a purpose, which is just basically a short summary of what the article's for. It's not the full language. And then below that, I'll provide my proposed appropriation total, my total offsetting revenues. And then in step 4, I have the ability to tell the portal that I'd like to start off with the DRA template language. Now, this is something you can edit later on. It's just sort of a starting point. And you'll see that the template language has some placeholders in it. So you'll be given this warrant article language when the article is created, and you'll go in and you'll put in the amount and the purpose as needed. Once I'm happy with everything, I click Generate. And what this does is this creates the warrant article, adds it to that table we saw before, and it would take us to the warrant article details. Before we get into that, I'm going to show you what importing does. If you go in and you use that import button that was at the bottom of this budget tab, it's going to copy all of your warrant articles from last year into this year, and it's going to show you the import date at the top. So on the 16th, I clicked import, it copied everything over. And what it does is it brings in the article number, the type, the purpose, the article language, and the appropriations and revenues that I used last year. What it doesn't do, and I'll show you this in the article details, is it doesn't tie out the totals. And this is done so that you're forced to go in and review all those imported articles. And I'll show you what I mean by that in just a minute. So down at the bottom here, we have all those buttons, and we can see that the import button has disappeared. Once I've actually imported the articles, I can't re-import until I've deleted everything. And it does this so that you don't accidentally import and create duplicates or overwrite any work that you've done. So again, if you mess something up and you want to start over, you have to go in and you have to delete all these articles to import again. So if we wanted to go in and view the warrant article details, we would click the red arrow next to the article we want to edit. In this case, we'll take a look at an operating budget article. So clicking that red arrow brings us to basically all the details. So it's everything we picked when we would have created the article, for instance. We can edit the number and the purpose, and we can change the proposed appropriations, the offsetting revenues, and the article language. It's worth noting that after an article is created, you can't change the category or the type. And that's because behind the scenes, certain articles behave differently. So there's no way to change it after it's already been created. Now these red boxes at the top are telling me that I have a mismatch between what I've told the system my total appropriations and revenues are and what I've actually itemized in the table below. In this case, we imported this article from last year. So it brought in the itemized amounts, but it left the totals as 0. And again, that's to force you to go in and review each article. So this is the article language box. This is where you would see the DRA template language appear. And this is where you can make the changes as needed. Right below this, there's a pre-review section, and I'll talk about pre-review a little bit later. And then towards the bottom of the page, you're going to see a table. You're going to run into this table a lot throughout the portal. This is broken into appropriations and revenues, and you can switch between the two sections by clicking the tabs at the top. Within each of them, we have a list of categories. So this is all the account codes organized by category. On the left are the categories themselves, and on the right are all the account codes within them. And what we're looking at right now is just the account codes within the general government category. So now when you're working on warrant articles, in this case, this town only has a board of selectmen. Some of you might have budget committees, but this is where you're actually going to go in and enter your recommended and not recommended amounts. And again, this is appropriations and revenues. You just end up switching the tab at the top. Once you've entered all your numbers, you can click the blue recalculate link right above the table. And what it's going to do is it's going to rerun through all your totals. It'll add everything up. And if you haven't made any mistakes and your itemized amounts match the total you originally gave it, the box is going to turn green. This is how I know I've tied out all of my proposed appropriations. And it's the same thing with revenues. So it's exactly the same process, regardless of which side of the article you're working on. Once you're happy with your article, you've got a couple options here. These 3 buttons appear on this page. Save and Next would save my progress and take me to the next warrant article on my list. Save and Home would take me back to the Budget tab. And the Delete button does exactly what it says. It'll warn me before deleting the article, but that's where you would go in if you needed to remove articles or anything. You just use the Delete button in each of them. So now I want to talk a little bit about the default budget. So I'm back to my Budget tab, and I have a default budget button at the bottom. Again, this is only for SB2 communities. When I click that default budget button, I'm going to get a special warrant article in the list. It's not really a warrant article, but this is kind of where you access the default budget from. Now, clicking the arrow next to it, it's going to bring me to the default budget interface. Now, this default budget includes all of the appropriations from your prior year's approved operating budget articles and any collective bargaining agreement articles you might have had. And you have the ability to go in and change some of these numbers in case anything came in incorrectly. So here, it's the exact same account code table that we saw in the warrant articles, and there's no estimated revenues on the default budget. It's just appropriations. The columns we care about are our prior year adopted operating budget figures, which again, you can correct if there was an error. And then you'll go in and you'll set up your reductions or increases, and then any one-time appropriations. And the portal is going to go through, add all these together, and give you what your default budget will look like. And it's worth mentioning here that if you make a change, you're going to have to provide a reason or an explanation to the DRA. Once you're all set, you're going to submit your default budget. So if you're an SB2 community, the default budget is required. It's part of the proposed budget process, and you submit it before you submit your proposed budget. So at this point, all my warrant articles have been entered. Go down to the bottom. My default budget has been submitted. We're going to talk about something called pre-review. So pre-review is a one-time notification. When you click that button, an email is going to be sent to your advisor. They're going to log into the portal, and they're going to go through all of your warrant articles. So they'll look at language, they'll look at appropriations, and if they find any issues, they're going to send you a message here in the portal. So again, once you request pre-review, the button is disabled. And pre-review itself is sort of a message board system. If the advisor goes in and makes comments on your articles or finds a problem, you're going to start to see some new icons appear in your warrant article table. Now, these icons indicate what the advisor has added in the pre-review section. If there are unread comments from your advisor that you haven't looked at yet, you'll see that envelope. If the advisor did not find any issues, or maybe you guys went back and forth and you resolved the issue, you'll see the green check mark. That's the advisor signing off on the article. Then finally, that yellow warning symbol indicates that there are still one or more issues that you have to resolve. Now, it's worth mentioning that pre-review is an optional process. It's recommended, but you don't have to go through it. So we looked at it briefly before, but the preview section is right below the article language in each warrant article. And what we see here is a required change comment from my advisor. If you click on it, it's going to expand it, and you'll see the advisor's feedback in greater detail. In this case, my advisor says, well, there's a problem with the article language. I don't really know what the problem is, so I'm going to reply by clicking Add Reply. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to ask, what exactly needs to be changed? What is the problem here? And then I'll click Save. This sends the message back to the advisor. It's going to appear here in the interface, and you can see right below it, the advisor has replied back. You have to look at paragraph 1. And you can go back and forth as many times as needed, basically with this reply functionality. And multiple users can participate. So if, for instance, you're the administrator, but you have a few users in the portal, all of you can participate in these discussions. Now, here I've replied, I revised the language, my advisor has taken a look at it, and they've marked it as completed. So they're happy with my change. So at this point in time, I've gone through all of my peer review comments. I've tied out all my appropriations and revenues. So for all my warrant, my monetary articles, it says true and true in that far right column, indicating that I don't have any errors there. And I resolved all of the issues that my advisor might have found. So at this point, we're pretty much ready to go in and submit the budget. Now for SB2 communities, I mentioned that you have to get your default budget submitted first. And that's what you see right here. If your default budget is submitted, you're going to see final over there in the right column. All right, so I'm in SB2, I've got everything in, all my warrant articles are done, so I'm ready to go to the next step here. So I'm going to click the View Calculate Budget button at the bottom of my table. And this is going to take me to sort of an aggregated budget view. And what the system has done here is it's come in and it's added together all of my warrant articles and summed up all of my appropriations and revenues. And I'm going to see all of it right here on this interface. These green boxes at the top indicate that all my warrant articles appropriations matched the totals, so that's a good thing. And all my revenues, the offsetting revenues, they all match. So if you see a red box up here, it means that one or more of your articles needs to be corrected. So again, we're seeing that account codes table, this time with a couple extra columns. First, we have the warrant article number column. This is telling me which warrant articles are contributing to each of these account codes in my proposed budget. I then have a column for my actual expenditures for the prior year. In this case, we're looking at a town that operates on fiscal year. Next to that, I have my original proposed appropriations from the prior year. And then finally, the recommended appropriations for this year and any not recommended appropriations. So those come from my warrant articles, and I'm really only responsible for reviewing and entering information into these two columns. Now, for towns and villages, some of you will automatically have these numbers populated. We know what your appropriations were last year, for instance. And if you have if you've started that 535 process in the portal, it's going to pull in the numbers you've reported already for your actual expenditures. And it's the same thing for revenues if we were to switch the tab here. Once I'm all set, I've entered all of my actuals. I'm happy with the totals. The estimated amount of taxes looks correct. All the numbers are in. I can finalize. Now, if you're an SB2 community, you have one more step. Clicking that Finalize button is going to bring you to the Supplemental Schedule. Now, this is that 10% schedule where you're going to see your exclusions, your collective bargaining agreement articles, and so on. So this is the last step for those of you who are SB2 communities. You'll fill that out, and then if you're not an SB2, you wouldn't see it at all, and all you have is the Finalize Budget button. So clicking that completes the entire process. That submits your 636 or 737, 26 or 27, whatever type of entity you are. And at that point, you're pretty much done. Now, what I want to talk about real quick are some frequently asked questions, and then I'll open it up to everybody if anybody has any questions or comments. So what do you do if you have multiple operating budget articles that are voted on separately? This happens in some communities. Some of you will vote on your water treatment budget separately from the rest of your operating budget, for instance. You have an article type for that. It's operating budget by function for towns. So you'll select that. You can create as many of these as you need, and the system will know that they are all operating budget articles. Now, how should you number your warrant articles? This is entirely up to you. I see towns use letters. I see towns use numbers. Some of them use the year and a letter and so on. The only thing I will say is that if you're using just numbers, 1 through 9, 10 through 20, I'd recommend putting a 0 in front of the single digit numbers so that they sort correctly in the portal and in the reports. So if you were to put, let's say Article 1, 2, and 3, and then Article 10, what you would see in the portal is Article 1, then Article 10, then 2 and 3, because it's sorting by that first number as if these were letters. Putting a 0 in front of the 1, the 2, and the 3 is going to make sure that they appear at the top of the list. Now, in the screenshots in this presentation, you saw some non-monetary articles. These are articles without appropriations or revenues. And the question often comes up, do I have to put those into the portal? No. Technically, you don't have to submit those to the DRA, but they highly recommend it. Adding those articles to the system also means that they will appear in all the relevant reports in the portal, and they can be imported next year or referred back to, which can be useful if you have some changeover in your staff. You'll always have a permanent record of those articles in the portal. So again, you don't have to put them in, but it's usually a good idea. And just to reiterate, pre-review is optional, but it's highly recommended. And what I see a lot is people will skip pre-review. They'll just submit everything and they'll walk away. And their advisor will come back and double check things and say, you messed up some language. And they're going to reset you, which means they're going to unfinalize your proposed budget, and you'll have to go in and make those changes anyway. And the reason the advisors do this is because if you screw up in the article language in certain ways, those articles can actually be disallowed by the DRA after your annual meeting. And that requires a corrective meeting and all sorts of stuff. So we recommend that everybody go through pre-review just to make sure there are no issues. Another common question I get when you guys are updating warrant articles, you've updated some warrant articles, you've clicked that View Calculate button, you've gone back and forth because you don't like the totals, and you've noticed that your latest round of changes aren't reflected in your draft report. That's because you have to click that View Calculate button at the bottom of the Budget tab. What that's doing, like I said earlier, is it's adding up everything and rolling it all into one proposed budget. And so that's basically what updates your report. And you'll also see a reminder at the top of the draft 636 or 737 that'll tell you very clearly that if something doesn't look right, if a change you made isn't reflected, you have to go back and hit that button. Almost done here. So you've gone through all the steps and you get to the very end, that supplemental schedule page, or if you're not an SB2, it's just the finalize page, and you don't have a finalize button. It's because you're a standard user. And no offense, but only administrators are allowed to finalize things. So that means you either have to log in with your admin account, or you have to get in touch with the admin for your town or your village district to actually submit that budget. And finally, this one might seem pretty obvious, but if your reports all say draft on them, you haven't submitted anything yet. You might have the numbers in the system, but nothing's been finalized. So don't save those reports and then erase the draft language and everything, because we're going to know what happened. We have ways to tell that you printed out a draft report and simply edit it and then scanned it. So you have to finalize things, and that's what's going to give you your signature lines, and it's going to remove all those draft watermarks that you see. Now, if you screwed something up after your proposed budget's been submitted and you find the mistake, it's just like with skipping pre-review. Your advisor has the ability to reset you. So if you found an error, just contact your advisor. Send them a quick email, give them a call, tell them you just need it reset. It takes them a couple seconds to do, and it'll allow you to go in and make the necessary changes. So we pretty much covered everything. There's some additional resources for you guys. If you run into questions about finance or statute, you should reach out to your advisor. If you run into an issue with the portal, or you know what you need to do in the portal, you just don't know how to do it, that's when you get in touch with us at Axiomatic. You can give us a call. Our 800 number and our local number, because we're based in New Hampshire, is right here. You can send us an email, or you can access the help portal. And the easiest way to do that is that help link in the upper corner. Your advisor information is right on your home tab in that yellow box. So with that said, I'm going to unmute the lines and see if anybody has any questions.